Hi kids, I'm Michael. Welcome back. Today we're going to be talking about neoliberalism, black education, and school policing. It's a movement, not a moment, so we have to keep learning. So let's get started. Now kids, the only neo I like sings songs, writes them, and wears a hat. Sadly, the song that we're going to be singing today makes me so sick. Kids, when we learn new spelling words, it's really good to break them down into smaller chunks so we can better understand them. Neoliberalism. Neoliberalism. Neo means new or enhanced. It's the old thing with some new added features. Liberalism, that's a little trickier, kids. Liberalism is an old capitalist economic standpoint that goes all the way back to people that you've probably read about, like Adam Smith or 18th century philosophers who were drawing on other Enlightenment thinkers. Liberalism is both a belief system and a way of operating the economy. It's good to think of words like liberate and liberty when we're talking about liberalism. So who is being liberated or restricted under liberal ideology? Well, the market is being liberated to do as it pleases, kids. Hence the free market. And the government is being restricted and interrupting the flow of that free market. Countries like the United States believe in the free market so people can buy and sell and own as many businesses as they want. This helps out the belief side of liberalism that supports hard work and small laissez-faire government and individualism. So neoliberalism is an intensified version of liberalism that happens on a global scale. Neoliberalism became dominant during the 80s under the President Devil, Ronald Reagan, and UK Prime Minister Margaret Thatcher. Margaret Thatcher. Neoliberalism has been the way both Democrats and Republicans and all global elites have operated since then. And just like liberalism, neoliberalism is a way of both running the economy and a belief system. Neoliberalism includes really complex processes that are going on at the same time, like deindustrialization, globalization, and deregulation, all working together. Under neoliberalism, corporations and businesses have very few restrictions. They're liberated and pretty much have free range over the market. They have total freedom to move their capital, goods, and services across the world. And they can also fire whoever they want, avoid taxes, ignore their workers, pollute rivers, increase prices, and privatize and underfund all our basic necessities. Isn't that great, kids? Most things that were public, like healthcare, transportation, and recreation, are privatized. Then law and order are used to protect private goods, private places, and private nations. So neoliberalism requires more militarized police, immigration detention centers, mass incarceration, and criminalizing people for being poor, women, gender non-conforming, or black, or some assortment of those things all at once. There are some provisions for the poor, but we don't want them to get too lazy. Cornel West tells us justice is what love looks like in public. Author, journalist, and professor Naomi Klein tells us that neoliberalism is what lovelessness looks like as policy. Which brings us to neoliberal beliefs. A lot of neoliberal ideology is seen as life lessons that we all have to learn as we go through life because, and you've probably heard adults tell you this before, kids, that's just the way it is. A lot of the way it is are just ideas that benefit neoliberal ideology disguised as normal attitudes and behaviors in society. Beliefs-wise, neoliberalism promotes super individualism, caring about the self over community, valuing people for how much wealth, recognition, or money they can give to you. You're only as good as the choices you make in life. Poor people don't make bad choices because of systemic poverty. They're poor because they make bad choices, kids. The market treats everyone equally. There's no history of racism, classism, colorism, sexism, homophobia, or xenophobia that might influence the market. Nothing should be free, public, shared, or provided by the government. We should compete with everyone for everything. Winners win because they worked for it and they achieved, and losers lose because they're failures, kids. Don't get me wrong, kids. Aspects of neoliberal ideology have been around for a long time. Just look at Walter Lee's character from Lorraine Hansberry's 1959 play, A Raisin in the Sun. There ain't no causes. There ain't nothing but taking in this world. And he who takes the most is smartest, and it don't make a damn bit of a difference how. Still, there's a uniqueness to neoliberalism. Under neoliberalism, life is about completely turning yourself into a walking, talking financial and social asset, kids. What economists call building human capital. Human capital puts the neo in neoliberalism. It loads all economic risk onto the shoulders of an individual or an individual family unit. Let's go to the blackboard, kids. You build human capital by choosing the right friends, making sure you live in the right house in the right neighborhood, getting the right haircut, or just being born with the right hair in the first place, dating the right person, marrying the right person, staying healthy and never getting sick. Ever, kids. Never talking about, associating with, or talking to poor people, smiling your way through soul-crushing oppression during work meetings, following the right influencers on Instagram and TikTok, manifesting positivity into your life and shifting your mindset so you can really live out your dreams, being racist and homophobic, but not coming off as racist and homophobic, kids, okay? Saying things like, I have to protect my brand. As black capitalist King Jay-Z says, I'm not a businessman. I'm a businessman. And as black capitalist Queen says, the best revenge is your paper. Under neoliberalism, the only purpose of doing anything wholeheartedly is to gain wealth, status, money recognition, or clout. Otherwise, it's useless. Like getting an education. Right, kids? How does neoliberalism influence education, especially how we educate our black students? Quick note, kids, there's a difference between black-led schools and predominantly black schools. We're going to be doing a whole separate video on the history of black schooling. Stay tuned for that one. Since neoliberalism hates free and public things, it really hates public education. Under neoliberalism, schooling is privatized and education itself turns into a commodity that is subject to the demands of a racist, classist market. Professor and author Bettina L tells us that corporate school reformers are an indispensable part of the neoliberal machine. Professor, author, and poet Ewing tells us that neoliberalism in education assumes that efficiency is an important goal in managing the schools and public education systems. That the best way to achieve such efficiency is to allow schools to function within the free market system based on competition. Along with budget cuts to public schools, especially arts and music education, it's obviously worthless because we can't see an immediate profit in it, kids. Mass closing of neighborhood schools. The illusion of choice through private charter and magnet schools, instead of everyone having a quality education, thereby creating competition between oppressed people instead of building solidarity and making it so your zip code determines your educational life or death. Author and sociologist Freeden Oeur breaks down neoliberalism into a few basic key themes. Standardization, uncreative and non-educational schooling that teaches to the test, and outsourcing lesson plans from testing companies that don't help students learn, just help them learn how to take tests. That brings us to innovation through educational management organizations. By this logic, the people who should be in charge of schools shouldn't have education degrees, but business degrees. Because that makes sense, kids. Accountability, or defunding already underfunded schools and firing teachers if their students don't pass horribly written tests. Competition between students for grades, competition between teachers for resources, between schools for funding, and between parents for just a basic quality education. And finally, kids, surveillance, which looks like state officials or sometimes undemocratically elected educational leadership waiting for already underfunded school administrators and teachers to mess up. Or a different type of surveillance for students. And you know what that means, kids. But remember, kids, neoliberalism is a way of orchestrating the economy and a belief system which maps onto our society's belief systems about race and poverty from earlier. In many poor Black and Latino schools, neoliberalism supports character education, respectability politics, teaching kids to reject their culture and language and natural childhood and young adult energy, awarding kids for beating the odds, but never getting rid of the odds, teaching them that they have to have grit to survive school, creating a horrible sense of superiority between students by telling them to have the right friends and don't hang out with the wrong friends. Focusing on discipline. Going to school becomes less about learning and more about staying out of trouble. Discipline is emphasized by zero tolerance policies, punishment for dress code violations, detentions, suspensions, and expulsions, all enforced by school police, which are at times outsourced by companies seeking to make a profit from the school at the expense of the safety and education of Black students. The UCLA $1 Million Hoods Project released 2018 data showing that 1/4 of all of the contact between police officers and students were with Black students. Black students only make up 8% of the Los Angeles Unified School District, kids. Monique Morris tells us that Black girls are especially and disproportionately pushed out of education and funneled into the school to prison nexus. All of these things are part of what Bettina L calls the educational survival complex, where students are left learning to merely survive, learning how school mimics the world they live in, thus making schools a training site for a life of exhaustion. Which brings us to today's quick but very important story, kids. On August 9th, in 2014, Michael Brown was murdered by a Missouri officer, Darren Wilson. The unlawful theft of Black life helped lead to the Black Lives Matters movement started by Black women Patrisse Cullors, Opal Tometi, and Alicia Garza. While Michael Brown died of a quick death, he was already dying of a slower political death that many Black students across the United States experience each day through the educational survival complex. Michael Brown attended Normandy High School in Normandy School District, which was 98% Black. Normandy gives us a great example of how neoliberalism impacts Black education. Based on academic rankings, the already underfunded Normandy School District was considered the worst school district in the state of Missouri, kids. Instead of improving schools overall, some people advocated for school choice, so they could go to the better school while everyone else was left to rot. The state put Normandy School District on probation for 15 years. Sometimes you don't have to waste time and criminalize each individual student when you can just use criminal terminology for the entire school district. The school district lost accreditation, which meant that kids got the choice to leave the schools and go to another school for free. So kids, just like you kids, went to not a better school, but a better funded school. 1 out of every 2 Black kids went to schools without accreditation in Missouri. 1 in 25 white students went to school without accreditation in Missouri at the same time. When a lot of the students left the Normandy School District, the state of Missouri took over the district. Normandy was being punished because it was underfunded and was forced to compete with other schools. Accountability meets surveillance. The state changed the name of the school district, which allowed them to change the accreditation status, and all the students who left had to come back. This back and forth is terrible for a stable education, kids. Kids, I'm not gonna sit here and convince you that police don't belong in schools. If you go to a school with police, you know that people patrolling with guns don't help you learn. I will tell you that policing happens in many different kinds of ways. Defunding public schools, taking away resources, and telling very stressed teachers, students, staff, and parents to perform on the same levels as schools that have way more. Kids, school is so much more than a place where you go to class. Schools are one of the last public institutions that provide basic services and necessities for communities across the country. Schools are a place of refuge, a place of socializing, a place where some kids get their only 2 meals a day. A place where students are cared for and loved on, a place where they can showcase their talents and skills, a place where people vote. A place where communities gather and remind themselves of what their values are. This is why the teachers of Diet High School in Chicago went on a hunger strike when their school was about to be closed by people who couldn't see the inherent value in their school that only they could see. Kids, the way your school is treated tells you many things. It tells you how much your politicians and local school board are willing to invest in your education and in your future. Black students at schools with low-income families and predominantly Black student populations often get a very specific message under neoliberal education. Our job is to change that message every single day. Black Lives Matter.